So I just like to remind everyone that this session, like all of our sessions, is being recorded. So if you are uncomfortable with showing your face, please keep in mind we are recording. If you do not want to have your voice or face recorded, you can just pop a question in the chat and then we will discuss it at the end of Maria's presentation. But that's all I have to say for now. So Maria, whenever you want, you can begin.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. I would like to thank, first of all, the ELINET team and Paulo for the organization. And very especially, I would like to thank Rima, as she is the person who first introduced me to ELINET. I would also like to thank the attendees and very especially my colleagues from Spain. I believe there may be some of my colleagues connected now or maybe later on. So that makes me very happy. So my name is María Deseada, as you can see on the slide, although everyone calls me Desiree or Desi. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I work as a teacher at the official School of Languages, Estepona, in southern Spain. I am an English teacher there. I will be telling you a little bit more about the system of the official schools of languages, but for now, let me just say that they are a network of state schools specialized in teaching languages to adults. Apart from being a teacher at my local school, I have collaborated with the Department of Education in my region, developing the curriculum, developing rating scales, and also some exam materials. I am a lecturer at the University of Malaga as well, and a PhD candidate. My PhD project is about linguistic mediation too. So this is a topic of my seminar, linguistic mediation in adult English language teaching in Spain, and particularly in the case of the official schools of languages. So I would like to provide an overview of how linguistic mediation has been incorporated into the teaching and assessment of languages at these official schools of languages, and how it has evolved in the last 5 years. So if I am going to talk about mediation, my starting point needs to be the CFR. So the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, and Assessment. It was published in 2001, and it is a cornerstone for foreign language teaching in Europe and all over the world as well. The CFR provides a common basis in order to design language syllabuses, materials, or exams, among many other aspects. We probably identify the CFR mostly with the different levels of proficiency that enable educators to measure or determine a given level of proficiency in a language or the progress made by students. We can probably all identify as well the different levels of proficiency described in the CFR and the scales with a number of can-do statements that describe what a learner can do or is able to do in each of the 6 different levels from A1 to C2. Now, the CFR intended to help change or accelerate a change of paradigm in language learning and teaching by drawing away from the more traditional model of the 4 skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, plus the study of pronunciation and vocabulary, moving away from that traditional system into a more complex scheme that includes or distinguishes between communicative language competences and communicative language strategies, but also communicative language activities articulated into 4 modes of communication. Now, in those 4 modes of communication, we have reception and production. They more or less correspond to the 4 skills we had before, but we also have interaction and mediation. So what exactly is mediation? Well, the CFR referred to mediation with the following in 2001. So in both the receptive and productive modes, the written and/or oral activities of mediation make communication possible between persons who are unable, for whatever the reason, to communicate with each other directly. Translation or interpretation, a paraphrase, summary, or record provides for the third party a reformulation of a source text to which this third party does not have direct access. Mediating language activities, reprocessing an existing text, occupy an important place in the normal linguistic functioning of our societies. I would like to call your attention here to the idea of reprocessing or manipulating an existing text and doing so for a third person, for somebody who has not access to the information for a number of reasons. Let me provide some examples, some everyday examples of what linguistic mediation might be. So, for example, an elderly relative, or my parents in this case, they receive a letter from the government or social security, and they don't quite understand what the letter says, or they don't feel confident about what they have to do next. So maybe they come to me, and I, as a mediator, explain to them, what the letter says in more simple terms. Or a completely different example, maybe a friend from another country is visiting, and we go to a restaurant. If the menu is not in English, I may translate the menu for my friend, but maybe the menu is in English and still my friend needs some more information, some clarification about the dishes, the ingredients, allergies, etc. So in that case, I'm not just translating, but I am also expanding the information, providing more details. Now, the CFR included scales for the different modes of communication, reception, production, and interaction in the 2001 edition, but mediation hadn't been developed in full. It's been more recently when those descriptor scales for mediation have been published with the 2020 companion volume. Besides other aspects such as plurilingual and pluricultural competence, or maybe some of the aspects that were included in the 2001 version needed to be readjusted now. Now, I'll come back to the companion volume in a moment, but let me now introduce the network of official schools of languages, or language official schools. As I said before, they are state schools that provide non-compulsory education programs in different languages, as well as standardized tests of language proficiency or accreditation. Now, according to the figures provided by the Ministry of Education, in 2021-2022, there were 337 official schools of languages in Spain. Sometimes the same school offers courses in different locations or campuses. Therefore, this figure may be a bit higher if the different locations are considered. A total of 328,000 students were enrolled in that academic year, of which 63.7% studied English. So English is the most widely taught foreign language at official schools of languages, just as it is in other educational contexts in Spain. Nevertheless, I have to say that these data may not be the most representative, given that 2021 and 2022 was a year right after the pandemic, which probably means that many students decided not to enroll and stay home, at least until the situation improved. However, those are the most recent figures I can provide. That's why I have used them. But please bear in mind that probably in previous years, the numbers were a bit higher. As to how educational competences are distributed in Spain, I must say that there is a general level, a central level that depends on the Ministry of Education and establishes the first level of curricular specification, that is the basic curriculum. From there, The next level goes to each of the 17 autonomous communities in Spain, which you can see outlined on the map in the slide. It is at this regional level that the official curriculum is established, incorporating, of course, the minimum requirements dictated by the central government. As there are 17 regions or autonomous communities with delegated authorities in education, there are minor differences between one autonomous communities and the next when it comes to different aspects of the curriculum. For that reason, I will focus on my autonomous community in particular, Andalusia, in the south of Spain, because I can provide more accurate information, as that is where I work and where I live. There are 52 schools in Andalusia distributed in each of the 8 provinces, with nearly 40,000 students enrolled for the academic year 21-22. Naturally, the 52 schools in Andalusia, they vary in size. Just to give you an example, for example, my school, which is the official School of Languages Estepona, there are approximately 700 students enrolled each year, and they can either learn English or French, or English and French. At the official School of Languages, in Malaga, which is the largest in the area, there are nearly 6,000 students and up to 11 languages. So there are 11 languages being taught. So as you can see, it is nearly 10 times bigger, one school than the other, and they are not too far away. Now, in the year 2017, the publication of an updated curriculum for the official schools of languages in Spain was imminent. The publication eventually was released late in the year on the 22nd of December, and it was followed a year later by another royal decree that set the basic principles of assessment and standardized examinations. So the second level of curricular specification for Andalusia would come later in June and July 2019. Therefore, over the time span of a year and a half, approximately, the new curriculum would have been totally implemented. The new curriculum brought along a number of changes. Well, the 4 skills in the former curriculum from 2006 remained. I have kept here the labels and names they have in the law. I have tried to translate them literally. So the 4 skills are still there, but they are no longer considered to be skills in the new curriculum, but modes of communication in line with the terminology of the CFR and the CFR companion volume. But on top of these 4 modes of communication, a 5th mode of communication was added, and that is mediation. And that really made a difference, yeah? When it came to the assessment in standardized certification exams, these exams are open to our students at the school, but also to external examinees too. So in this case, we had then 5 parts in the exam, 5 papers, and a candidate would pass the overall competence test with a minimum score of 65% of the total. And moreover, each separate paper must or needed to be passed, it continues to be like this, with a minimum of 50%. So this means that mediation suddenly becomes an integral part of the curriculum and, of course, of the certification exams. If a candidate does poorly in one of the papers, it's not compensated through the other parts of the exam. So the minimum of 50% must be reached in all parts of the exam. Now, how was mediation implemented then throughout the several academic years after the publication of the new curriculum? The royal decree came at the end of 2017, but the second level of curricular specification still needed to be developed. This means that 2018, 2019, can be considered to be a transitional year. And this is precisely when teachers first learned that at some point in the near future, in a matter of months, they would need to teach mediation and assess mediation as well. So from having barely heard the concept in the CFR in 2001, if that is the case, they would go straight away into teaching mediation and assessing it. So the teachers needed training and guidance so that to know what exactly was expected of them. The main source of information at the time was, and it continues to be, the companion volume. But there were no ready-made materials or previous papers or exams that they could really look at, or any other sort of materials they could expect to have or benefit from. Now, the CFR companion volume, it did not only include a more detailed definition and a broader interpretation of the concept of mediation, but it also included the breakdown of the different mediation activities and strategies for which different scales are provided. I'm going to be showing you a section of this picture so that it's a bit bigger. So I'm going to be focusing on mediation activities only. This is a set of activities which involve mediation and which are divided into 3 types. Mediating a text, which involves passing on, transferring, transmitting the information from a source or input text to the addressee. Mediating concepts would be the second. It deals with the collaboration and interaction of interlocutors in order to construct, or rather co-construct, meaning. And finally, mediating communication, which tackles those activities in which individuals come to an understanding among others. To summarize it in just one word, following Rosanna Margoni's Pacinetti here, the first set, mediating a text, would be about text processing. The second, mediating concept, deals with group work or teamwork. And finally, the last set, which is mediating communication, is about interculturality. So although all 3 sets of activities can be exploited in classroom situations through different tasks, designing tasks for certification exams narrows it down to a much more limited scope, mainly because of the limitations in administering a test to a large number of candidates. So namely, it is text processing that candidates are presented with in the mediation exams that we have created so far at the official schools of languages. The same thing happened, the same narrowing down happens when we think of the possible combinations that result from the different types of input text, registers, varieties of languages that can be part of a mediation activity. We are not just talking about verbal texts, we may be talking about non-verbal texts. So for example, an image may be mediated into a spoken text, or an infographic into a written text. So when it comes to the languages, we are no longer referring to first language or target language or L1 or L2, and rather we talk about language A and language B. And that is so because a user may be mediating from one of the languages in the plurilingual repertoire into another, not necessarily being the former their first language. So as it happened with mediation activities, that we narrowed them down, despite having a number of possibilities, just a few were being used in exams. So once again, on the grounds of exam logistics and other limitations, the same sort of thing is going to happen when it comes to different types of texts or possible combinations. In our case, the official schools of languages in Andalusia, exam tasks are designed using written, visual, and multimodal texts, with a preference for the last one, but not oral texts, not spoken ones. And as to the choice of languages, only intralinguistic mediation features in English exams. So from language A into language A. The reason behind this choice of intralinguistic mediation lies in the fact that candidates, both students at the schools or external examinees, may not be proficient in Spanish or not proficient enough so as to do the task well. So it may interfere with how they are able to manage mediation. As you can imagine, this has a huge backwash effect in the sense that only intralinguistic mediation is used in exams. However, it is up to the teacher to make more or less extensive use of cross-linguistic mediation in the classroom. And the implications of this are important because this is an actual change from what we had been doing before. If we were used to a more restricted use of the L1 in the classroom, even to, I would say, using the L1 maybe somehow demonized. And if we are actually doing cross-linguistic mediation, this means that it paves the way into a more controlled type of cross-linguistic practice. As Furch and Casper put it, learners should be free to combine and explore all their resources, be they linguistic or non-linguistic, in completing a task as they would in reality. This means using all the plurilinguistic and general competences, plus acquiring and deploying appropriate communication strategies. So in mobilizing all their resources, practices such as translanguaging or code switching become an asset among some other resources at the user's disposal. Please allow me now to show you an example of a really simple cross-linguistic task that we have done at my school in the last couple of years. It was created by my colleague and ELINET member, Ana Flores. As you probably, maybe some of you know, in Spain, the Christmas season ends very late. It ends on the 6th of January, after the celebration of the Magi, or the three wise men, the three kings, as you can see in the picture. So on the very first day after the Christmas break, we present our students with this task. The task is modeled after the ones used in certification exams, but yet the difference is that it involves mediating a text in Spanish into English. And there is cultural content that goes with it as well, yeah? So let me explain now what the tradition connected to the cake is. So this cake, I'll show you a photo here, hides inside a bean and a figurine. So if you happen to find the bean in your slice of cake, it means that you're expected to pay for it. You're going to pay for the roscón de Reyes. However, if you find the figurine, you wear a paper crown that you can see there in the box. So this tradition sometimes is written down in a piece of paper as the one you can see here and included in the box. Yeah? Now, the cake and the tradition that goes with the cake is likely to be very well known to most, if not all, of our students in the group. And we also assume when we put this task into practice that because we have all been enjoying this cake on those days, probably we have cake on the 7th of January for breakfast too, our students will feel motivated enough at least to discuss what the tradition is about. Yet, this task becomes really meaningful if there is someone in the group who is not familiar with the cake or the tradition around the cake. We may be actually mediating with a real life purpose if that is the case. As this task is mainly targeted at lower intermediate students, they are bound to find an equivalent or translanguage, or even use the same word in Spanish for maybe bean, maybe they don't know how to say that, or fava bean. And that is likely to happen. Or it could also be the case that in mediating the tradition or the text, the input text, They expand the information and maybe refer to the French tradition, which is very similar with the galette de roi, which is a very similar sort of cake and also hides something inside. What actually happens, though, is that we are using the occasion to bring up a timely topic that is conveniently modeled into an exam-like task. So for that reason, even though we may have a discussion, actually the students are asked to work on a written exercise, on a short written exercise. The context is the paragraph that you can see at the top. So your British neighbor has been given a cake with the following message, and they are asking you for clarification, and you have to write an email of 50 to 60 words. So this context that provides the need for mediation has been made up. It is artificial and maybe far from reality for some, if not most of the users. So maybe it would make sense that if this situation is real, but you probably talk to your neighbor or during conversation, but not so much send an email. So this task is just an example of the potential of mediation activities and the somehow reductionist alternative that we end up putting into practice because mediation has become a part of the exam. And we need to train students for the exam. And we have even created our own rules about how they have to do it. This task, in fact, resembles the type of task that was finally decided upon once mediation was implemented in full at the official schools of languages in Andalusia, with the only difference that cross-linguistic mediation would be avoided for the reasons that I explained before. So if we continue with this timeline, we will see that this type of mediation is the one that was in use for 3 academic years, from 2020 to 2022. So when it was first introduced into the exam as a separate paper, candidates were expected to write 2 short, or to work on 2 short intralinguistic written mediation tasks. Why not 1 oral mediation task and 1 written mediation task, as this is what was being done in most autonomous communities, and this seems to be the most comprehensive model? Well, it was decided that 2 written mediation tasks would be a better choice for a number of reasons. First of all, once again, the logistics of the exam. By adding 1 more oral task to the speaking paper, the oral session of the test would be too long, and that would be unfeasible for bigger schools. And an additional advantage of this model is that the examiner has additional time to process the response when marking it. Remember that we are also, I'm not referring to them, but we are also using new rating scales. So a written task gives you additional time to think about your marking, and this is essential, particularly because teachers felt unprepared for mediation for the most part. I'd like to show now the mediation paper, the actual mediation paper for B2 level in 2020. So the very first time that mediation was included as a separate part of the exam. This happened to be the year of the pandemic. I'm not focusing on that. Obviously, this also had consequences on how well we could prepare our students, or what we could do from home. Now, as you can see, there are 2 tasks, task 1 and task 2. In the first one, the candidate needs to relay the information from the input text, what you can see in the box, and it's going to be transmitted, making it fit the context established. In the second one, the input text is an infographic. So it's a multimodal text, which the candidate needs to verbalize and explain for an addressee who has difficulties understanding the information. Now, on the downside, of having this mediation exam model is the fact that candidates found themselves writing 4 texts on the day of the exam. 2 of them as part of the writing paper, and then these two more, as part of the mediation paper. It was clear that this exam model was a temporary measure, but not the ideal one either. So besides the feeling of redundancy that goes with writing 4 texts in a row, even if these ones are really short, the written session of the certification exam was also too long and tiring. So oral mediation needed to be included in the accreditation exams. That further change has taken place recently, and we've had already 2 exam calls with this new model that you can see at the bottom. So we had the first call in June 2023, and the second even more recently in September 2023. This new model involves that rather than 2 written mediation tasks, we're going to have 1 oral mediation task plus a written mediation task that is integrated in the paper written co-production. So it continues to be an intralinguistic task from English into English, and candidates are expected to pass on the information contained in an input text. For oral mediation, is most likely to be a sort of infographic that contains images and written text, according to the given situation. Depending on the level of proficiency of the candidate may be expected to just relay the information or select which information needs to be conveyed beforehand, or amplify the content provided. As it had been the case with other exam models, changes in the exam were known a few months before the actual exam, and teachers had to come up with their own hands-on solution to teach students and provide tips on how to perform on the day of the exam without that much information. An example of those hands-on solutions are the resources created by teachers that are available online. My colleague, Mónica Redondo Arias, a teacher at the official School of Languages in Marbella, has created a number of videos of mediation, which have become a must for students and teachers alike. She produces different types of content, not exclusively on mediation, but her video on mediation created 3 years ago, the one that you can see at the bottom, and it was created around the time when mediation was going to be assessed separately, is one of the most popular. To this day, as you can see, there are 97,000 views of this video only. And please don't miss the SOS, as you can see in the picture, as it clearly conveys, well, the feeling on those days. Now, wrapping up, the process that I have outlined here about the inclusion of mediation in the official schools of languages evidences that this is a process of learning that is still ongoing. We are still adjusting to the concept of mediation itself, and every alteration made to the exam is indicative that we have been very much trotting a bumpy road. The progress made so far will surely be of help to keep learning about mediation and how it can be implemented in the classroom and in certification exams. A second point, as you can see there, concerns how educational institutions have managed the inclusion of mediation. Much to our dismay and that of our students, the way educational authorities have imposed mediation has provoked resistance and reluctance on the part of the teachers and other stakeholders. Well-timed training sessions, as well as human and material resources, are indispensable, and they have not always been available. Even now, when recent changes have been made to the certification exam, they happened a few months before the exam and without a clear idea of what oral mediation would be like. Teachers had to make up or to make do for those deficiencies as best as they could by creating their own tasks, by exchanging ideas, and by following a trial and error system. A third conclusion has to do with the broader scheme that the CFR introduced and the question of whether it has actually, this scheme has made an impact on education at our official schools of languages. Mediation is one component of a much larger, complex, and multi-dimensional vision of language education, in which the learner is just, well, not just, but is a user that co-constructs meaning. And language learning is not just an exam, preparation for an exam, or the time that someone spends at school. Rather, it's a dynamic approach, the action-oriented approach that impacts an individual throughout their life. So from this very complex conceptualization of the action-oriented approach, we seem to have kept a very tiny bit in the form of a reductionist implementation of linguistic mediation at our official schools of languages. This idea goes in line with what Mark Levy and Neus Figueras say in a recent publication in which they analyze the impact of the CFR, and they come to the conclusion that the change of paradigm that the CFR advocated already in 2001 may be yet to come. Despite the difficulties we have faced, it is undeniable that changes bring about new opportunities for growth. Examples of that are the chances for cross-linguistic practice, something totally or nearly new in our practice, the redefined role of the L1 in the classroom, or the simple occurrence of more visual and multimodal materials that seem to go hand in hand with mediation practice. But most importantly, all these changes, they have made us teachers and probably other stakeholders as well, question how we do our teaching, whether it's being as fruitful as it should be, whether we are perpetuating practices that are outdated, whether what we are doing could be replaced by better practices or techniques. So only time will tell if the sudden inclusion of mediation signal a deeper change at the official schools of languages. We'll see. Yeah? This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. This is my email address as well. And here you can see my sources. I'll be happy now to answer any question. So you can see my sources here. And I'll go back then to this one.
Thank you so much, Maria. Actually, that's I say that to every single presentation I get, but this one was really very interesting, and I think it relates a lot to some of the things that I'm doing, even though it's a different research area. I do see a lot of how to say, connections. In fact, I was writing down some questions to ask, but before I do ask any questions, is there anybody else from our audience who would like to ask something to Maria? If not, then I will take advantage to ask. Yeah, actually, I have quite a few questions that we have Nadia first. Nadia, speak up.
So I'm very quickly going to just jump in here. I can't remember now if the word is method or what the word. I can't remember the word that you've been using, but I'm very fascinated by this galette de roi, or I don't remember the Spanish version either. Have you had a lot of success with it?
Sorry, Nadia, what was the last thing you said?
Do you have a lot of success with this?
Well, this exercise is actually, it works quite well. We do it right after we returned to school after the Christmas break. So we've all been eating and students quite enjoy it, yeah? Even though, as I said, we make them write, which probably it's much more interesting if it's a discussion. And it's happened to me, for example, that there was a Bulgarian student in class, even though she had been living in Spain for a while, I don't know how, but she had never seen it or eaten it. So it was really interesting because students were telling her how the cake worked and everything. So it's a very popular one, but as usual, when it's real and there is the need to explain because somebody doesn't know, that's when you realize that that's a meaningful activity. When we make them right, it's because that's how they're going to get mediation.
Yeah.
On the day of the exam.
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you. It's very, very
Thank you,
interesting.
Nadia.
It's yeah. Over to you, Paulo.
Thank you, Nadia. So, Maria, one thing that I wanted to ask, so quite rightly, you mentioned that this whole thing, this whole need for teachers to come up with these new tasks to teach mediation, this was a new thing. And as you mentioned, this was something that came from the top, right? This was something that was imposed by the policy, and you explained quite a few people didn't know how to handle this, but eventually something came up. And could you tell me a little bit more about the development process, like how these, because this was something that came from the top, how was it possible for teachers, for various practitioners to find a way to implement this new need?
So the very first moment we learned that we would have mediation soon, there was still time. So lots of training workshops emerged, but for the most part, they were about theoretical aspects. So the main source of information is a companion volume. There is a lot there, but there are no ready-made exercises, which is what teachers needed. Publishers reacted quickly as well. So many, because we use textbooks in class, so many publishers, they created booklets that would be like an annex to the materials. But there was a problem. As each autonomous community was deciding on a slightly different type of exam, in some autonomous communities, it's cross-linguistic, not every material was useful to your situation. For example, the materials we needed, the exercises we want to have ready to use, needed to be from English into English, for example. Now, we kept having lots of training. In some of those trainings, it's true that it was useful. We were given maybe guidelines as to how to create activities. And then we would create our own, sometimes share between teachers. But if you have to create those materials, you end up creating a few of them, and they may not feel enough for students when they have to sit the exam at the end of the year. Maybe you end up practicing mediation 2 or 3 times. On top of that, that happened when the first time it was a separate exam was in 2020, June 2020. So lockdown, there were no lessons. As much as possible, some teachers continued maybe lessons from home, but it depended really on the digital skills of the teacher and the students, of course. So maybe it happened, well, that year the exam was postponed to September, summer in between, so there is a summer break. So probably when students sat in September for that mediation task, it may have been the case that for many of them, it was the very first time they did some mediation exercise. Sometimes instructions make it very clear. It's just a matter of doing what the instructions say. But maybe they expect that it's something more difficult than it actually is, or just the uncertainty of getting a part of the exam with a different name, because everybody's used to reading. Now you're going to work on reading. Nobody questions that. But when you say now you're going to do mediation, they say, okay, and what is that? That happens a lot with external examinees when they register for the exam. The moment they learn they have a mediation exam, the question is, what exactly is that? So it requires some training. So it's been an ongoing process, maybe of creating materials. And after a few years, we have been using past papers. But once again, past papers, there are a limited number of samples in there. Yeah. So I think we still feel that we could do with more. For example, what we do on a daily basis, maybe we check the exams of other autonomous communities and adapt them. Fortunately, most of them are available online. And then we end up creating our own materials sometimes.
Right.
So it's a mixed process, yeah?
I understand. Thank you so much. Yeah, and actually, by saying this, you actually answered one of the other questions I wanted to ask. So I only have one more, which is basically, so I understand this is, okay, it's new for the Spanish context. It's been going on only since it has been officialized in 2019, as I understand, 2018, sorry. How much research is being conducted in this area about mediation task, even outside of Spain?
Yes. Ever since the companion volume came out, it's been growing so much, yeah? There's still a lot being done. Our first reaction at the time was to look at other countries in which mediation was happening, such as Greece. There were also some examples in Germany and Austria, although it was cross-linguistic mediation.
Right.
But ever since then, there's been more and more literature on the topic, and still there needs to be more referring to specific contexts such as ours. For example, right now, there is another aspect, which are our rating scales. So what sort of rating scales do you need to assess mediation, particularly oral mediation, which is not just about the linguistic component? There are other parts, other aspects to it. So I think research on those areas is happening right now. It will probably keep growing in the near future and is very much needed. So yes, in the last 5 years, particularly the last 3 years, there have been a lot of publications. Not all of them address the specific context of the official schools of languages, though. Yeah, it refers to a broader context in Europe, because mediation is present in many other exams, just not as a separate paper. It's a sort of, it's included, integrated into all the tasks. The strategies that you put in practice are there. So they are not very different from what we have been doing before in other types of tasks, which involve doing different things. Yeah, but I assume that the literature will keep growing, yeah? Well, my PhD project is about this, so this is also a good example that it is a topic that it is interesting at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I will need to find some more information about this, because a lot of the things that you said are very resonant for my area, which again, it's different, but very similar issues, very similar problems. And it's very interesting that there seems to be a connection with the way people had to deal with it. But again, very, very interesting. I have one. You actually mentioned this before. One last question. How was it received by this change? This new implementation by both the students and the teachers. Is there already research done on this? Or
as far as I know, there is not. Well, our perception as teachers is that teachers were reluctant. What? Precisely because we were never asked in the first place, yeah. We were told that it was going to happen, but we hadn't been trained for that, maybe as we would have wanted to. So there have been really some sort of protests on the part of the teachers. Probably little can be done about that because it's part of the curriculum. Changing that is complicated. Students also got together, particularly in 2020, as the exam was postponed. Not many of them could have access to lessons during the spring, the months before the exam. That's when you are supposed to be training more intensely. So there were also some letters being sent asking for a change. And then there is this recurrent debate. Probably it's not written down anywhere, but among teachers, like mediation, when is this going to disappear? Some teachers would even say we can really, or we will better without mediation. Yeah, maybe making it a part of the exam independently is what changed all. Particularly, we are faced with very difficult situations when there is a student who passes all the papers, but not mediation. And maybe because the student is unfamiliar with what they are expected to do, For example, we expect them to paraphrase. We don't want them to take whole chunks of the text and use them into their mediated text. This is a sort of rule we have created ourselves, particularly if you are expected to manipulate the text to fit the context, right? So it can be difficult. I assume that as this is part of the curriculum, it's not going to change until there is a new curriculum. And I can see, maybe I am one of those few teachers who are excited. There are more teachers excited about these, that there is really a window of opportunities here and different things can be done. And I can see the reasoning behind mediation and how it's all part of a more complex scheme of understanding language learning really as a more dynamic thing that is part of your life. So I look at it from a positive perspective, but I also get it because we have been faced with that situation in which you have to give your students practice and you haven't seen what the exam is going to be like. So you assume the exam is going to be like this, but you don't know for sure. What if you were telling them to do something and then on the day of the exam, they get something completely different? So that uncertainty probably is what has made the teachers reluctant. Yeah, but probably we have also made progress in this time. I think now we feel that it's been a long way, but we know so much more than we did at the beginning. So that's the positive side of it.
I see. No, that's great. And I knew that was my last question, but this one is very, very basic. When does it start getting taught in Spain? I mean, linguistic mediation. When does it start?
Well, the curriculum came out in 2017, but that was December. So the year would finish in a few months. Nothing happened then. Then in 2018, 2019, I haven't mentioned that in my presentation, but we had a sort of provisional solution, and there was a sort of a mediation component in the exam that year, but it was done so that it was practically impossible for a student to fail the written paper on the grounds of mediation. It was a very tiny bit just to justify that it had to be there. So officially, the exams of June 2020 that were postponed, that was the first time in Andalusia. In other regions, maybe 2018, 2019 was already. And they also started with oral mediation then. We have just started with oral mediation, which is a completely different thing. Because when it comes to marking, you have to be doing that at the same time that you are listening to them. So it requires more familiarity with mediation. That's why we have waited until now to do it.
And at what level of education did they start doing this? Like in high schools?
This is just in our system, so it is non-compulsory.
Right,
and our students are all adults. We can have teenagers, if they are studying the same language that they are doing in secondary school, they must be 16. We have a very few teenagers. We have some, but most of them are
mostly adults. Okay,
exactly.
yeah.
So yes, it is just in our system that this is happening. If you get your certification from any other institution, you are not going to have a mediation exam there. But the figures that I shared with you, well, there is a significant number of people enrolled. And as well, there may be some groups of people, civil servants, that may need our certificate specifically. So once again, for them, there's no choice. They have to become familiar with mediation and do their best.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maria. Is there anybody else? We might have time for one final question if anybody wants to ask or comment.
No, I'd also just like to say thank you, Maria. This is very interesting for me, just from a South African context. And I mean, you are also at my seminar, and our topics are not the same, but they do sort of link. And it's just, I'm so frustrated by the people who are in charge, who have no idea what's going on.
Top-down decisions, absolutely. Yes.
It breaks my heart, because it doesn't feel like, I mean, we have classes with 40, 45 kids in them. and this is a secondary school class. I'm not even talking about university lecturers. There's no way that you can. Anyway, so thank you. This was it's really just sort of heartening to see that it's not just in my own context that this is a problem.
No,
yes,
it's
a little bit of that as well. So thank you, Nadia.
I think it's worldwide.
Yeah, I think it's
Generalized.
quite common actually, in one shape or another, in one thing or another. But anyway, yeah, thanks everybody for coming today. I will actually stop the recording now, but once again, thank you, Maria, for this wonderful presentation.